We'll go ahead and go live. A little early, but I'm brewing up a coffee. So, what's up, everyone? I hope that you all are having an awesome day. Go ahead and drop in the chat for those of you live where y'all are tuning in from. That's why I get my mustache hair is not tickling my nose. Where are we tuning in from? Let's see. I'm also trying out for the first time this deep Kafek dripper. I bought one a while ago to check it out, and it's just been sitting in my cabinet. We got Munich, Germany, North Carolina, Netherlands, another North Carolina. Uh-oh. Got a couple of NCers up in here. Melbourne, Australia, Norway, Switzerland, UK. Daggum. We got a nice little representation. This makes you do multiple pours, I'll tell you that. Maryland, West Texas, Tokyo, Japan. Wow, you're up late. Or Tokyo, Japan. Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're up late, right? It's like 11. Puerto Rico, Melbourne, Australia. All right, let's do just one more pour. Let's go to there. I'm brewing up Típica Mejorada from my boy Pepe. This is from, I butchered it last time, but this, for those that speak German, people gave me tips on how to say it, and I can't remember the tips. But yeah, let's see. Baltimore, Maryland. Good morning, all. Good morning, Gage. All right, this is finishing up. We'll see how it tastes. Yeah, I did a monster video yesterday. The Coffeetech Monolith video was going to be very long. It's because there was a lot I wanted to discuss. It will likely be like an hour long. I was thinking at the end of it, I was like, maybe I should do a short one for the main channel and do the longer one for Unfiltered. But I just said, you know what? Screw it. I've not done an hour-long video in a while. We're just gonna do it. I don't feel like not doing it, so we're just gonna do it. Cool. Let's see. We got Luchtfeuer. Luchtfeuer. Pronounce it like Leuchtfeuer. Which one was better, the first or the second? Leuchtfeuer or Luchtfeuer? I'm not sure. Good morning from Czechia. Oh, the second one. Okay, nice. Leuchtfeuer. From Czechia, from New Valley Hospital, Paramus, New Jersey. Paramus. What is your favorite coffee drink? Coffee. Malta, USA, Virginia. This beer is kind of shaped as a bripe. Good morning from Dallas. Nice. We've got quite a stretch. Asia, Europe, and it seems North America mostly. From Italy. Nice. All right. So I've got the Discord questions pulled up, and we will be going through those. I'm just going to go with like the most liked ones. So my eyes are going to be kind of myopic. I'm going to be looking strictly at the ones with the most emoji reacts. So you still have time to go and emoji react to some of them. I don't know what cup should I use? You know what? It's a live. We got to go with my DBZ mug. I love this thing. No shame. Oh yeah. You know, sometimes you just got to do it to it. You know what I mean? The Ginyu Force. Come on. That's sweet. Okay. From Kenya. Nice. We've got Africa representing. Alabama, Japan, Portland, Oregon, Alabama, Czech Republic. Nice. All right. So first question up from Steven says, what's your opinion on basket choice for a turbo shot? Do you think HE or high extraction is generally better, or do you prefer a traditional basket? So if you recall in my video with about the distribution screens or shower screens in general and the distribution above it, I show some data that our one of our own community, Rohan, gathered for me, and it seems that that when you're cutting apart the let me turn off this dehumidifier. It's making noises and it's annoying me. All right, when you're extracting your coffee, it looks like the puck actually does a good job with edge extraction when using even traditional baskets when you do turbo shots. They are such a more even method of extraction that it would seem, especially at the water debit he's using, which I would imagine is about 8 or so. I think he tops out on the decent, but that it should be quite an even extraction even without using the high extraction. With high extraction, you would either need to be okay with even faster times, or if you're uncomfortable with faster times, you'd have to go a bit finer than traditional. So in reality, I think turbos, I think you can dial them in to taste delicious on either, and it's because they're going to give you similar extractions through the puck. Now, obviously, the amount of hole coverage on the bottom will affect the fineness of grind size for a specific desired time, extraction time. But time can be a red herring a lot of times. Um, Redundancy. My name is Lance. Getting you force. Okay. So I mean, it's one of those things where I can't really say which would be preferred. Either one is going to do a good job. I really enjoy using high extraction baskets as my MO anyway. Um, I normally just don't take out my Swarks basket. Or my unifilter. I have two portafilters, my go-tos. I have two different canals, and one has the Weber unifilter, and one has the Swarks. And I just kind of use those, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, the Pullman with turbo shots, great. VST with turbo shots, great. IMS turbo shots, great. It's all good. It's all good. Effects of different types of agitation when making a pour over so like using wet WDT, a swirl versus kettle stream. So all of these are obviously going to impact the brew in a similar way, but also in a different way. Similar in that you are going to cause more clogging of the filter paper. So when you do swirling, when you do wet WDT, or when you use a more agitative or turbulent kettle stream, you will cause more clogging of that paper filter, which will lengthen the drawdown time, increase contact time, et cetera, et cetera. Now, wet WDT is something I started doing, I think, in late 2021 or so when I showed my tricklet recipe. I was doing wet WDT then, and I really enjoy it on the tricklet, for instance, because I like to grind really coarse on it, and it helps improve contact time instead of just letting the water flow through those river rocks. And so it's good to use if you're trying to really ensure you're slowing down the contact time. There's not much agitation from the shower screen on a tricklet or something like that. My hair is all wonky, isn't it? Daggum. In order to really slow down that drawdown, there's no way you can change your pore structure because it goes through that shower screen, right? So in that situation, you really only have that. I guess you could swirl as well, but swirling doesn't really affect the bottom and doesn't really fully agitate the bed as effectively as wet WDT does. Now, wet WDT doesn't necessitate the shooting out of fines as much as swirling does, and it's because it's less aggressive unless you aggressively wet WDT. So if you swirl it, if you stir really aggressively with your WDT tool, you are going to allow some of that fines clogging. You can kind of go through and excavate with it just to kind of open up pockets of coffee that might be resistant to water saturating them, which is going to be a different approach with WWDT. Good grief, that is a lot to say. Wet raking. We'll just call it wet raking. That's less of a tongue twister. So when you do wet raking, it is not you can approach it in different ways, right? Swirling has like one objective. It settles the bed and it will throw out fines and kind of clog and slow down the drawdown. There's no real other way you can do it. You can obviously swirl more aggressively or less aggressively, but it's the end result is going to be the same, or the end goal is the same, which is settling the bed and slowing down the drawdown. Obviously, the more aggressively you do it, the more clogging will happen, the slower the drawdown will be. But with wet WDT, it doesn't necessarily have to have a slower drawdown. You can do a very gentle one with the goal of just making sure the whole bed is wet to ensure you're breaking up any clumps or any, like I said, coffee is largely hydrophobic, doesn't want that water to come in. So clumps can kind of form, and you have to kind of force them open so it can get wetted, so the diffusion can, the saturation diffusion can occur. But you can also stir really quickly and kind of force force some of that fines ejection. So what we have when we're doing pour overs is you have fines that are obviously, I mean, they're all scattered throughout the dose. You have some more free floating ones, but most of them, I don't know if I can say most with any objectivity, but a ton of them are attached to boulders, to bigger grounds. And so whenever you are brewing and you're pouring, sometimes they'll stay with the grounds or they can leave and find other areas to stick to. And the more you swirl, the more you're allowing the free floating ones to go out to the edges via centrifugal force and stick and clog those pores inside the filter, which gives you less surface area for the draining of the coffee. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, if you're using coarse grounds and you do a 2 pour brew and you don't do any agitation, you're going to have like a 1 minute drawdown and it'll be really under extracted. But if you can slow it down with those fines, with the aid of the fines, you can arguably improve the taste of your coffee quite a bit. So when you're doing an agitative pour, something like a lot more turbulence, you're also causing a lot of that potential disruption in the bed that can cause fines clogging. Now, something to be to understand is fines are likely not going to be over extracting. Now, I know that might be confusing because even in my brewer's cup routine a few years ago, I discussed the removal of fines, and it seems in hindsight that the bigger reason than over extracting fines, that the bigger reason that was helpful is I was able to quicken the final bit of that drawdown. There was other things at play. Obviously, I made some false correlations because that's what brewer's cup kind of forces you to do. But fines are so small that they are pretty readily extracted. So you're more so using them as a roadblock than anything else. Now, that all being said, there are fines small enough, more so cell wall fragments and things like that, that are able to fit through the filter. So a lot of agitation can also force some of these bits into your cup of coffee. Some of them are small enough that they can obfuscate your palate. They can kind of clog. They can kind of cause issues with astringency. There are astringent particles that can be made through with excessive agitation. So that is important to kind of understand. So when you're looking at the different options, one is obviously a natural agitation when you're using the kettle, not anything added outside of that. So that's going to both flip the bed very, very effectively, the most effective out of all of them. There's no other way of ensuring that type of flipping manually outside of using the kettle. And the reason I say that is right after you pour, your water is going to be draining through pretty quickly. So if you can if you can use that stream in order to cause that full flip before the bed settles, you're doing a good job. After the bed is settled, yes, you can cause it to another flurry, but it's adding a whole other dynamic to the agitation that can cause a lot more clogging. So you're essentially doubling down. Even if you do just a normal pour and then stir, you're going to cause more potential fines ejection into the filter than if you were to just use an agitative pour, something like with turbulence. So when you're approaching these different things, what you need to keep in mind, and this is what I do when I'm brewing, is I kind of let the coffee talk to me. That sounds really hippie and weird, but I do. As I'm pouring, I watch the rate that the water is going through the coffee, especially during the bloom. If you still have kind of a puddle with the bloom, and it's not a fully dried bed and it doesn't happen pretty quickly, then okay, this coffee is wanting to really hold on to this water. So how do I continue my brew? I don't ever just sit and go, okay, I'm going to continue with my typical type of pour. Maybe I'll switch to a slower laminar pour because I know that the coffee's already absorbing water really readily. It's more happy to absorb the water. And so it might slow down. I might have a really slow process. So instead of doing like a typical really agitative pour, I will switch and do kind of a laminar thing. And then as I'm pouring, you can kind of see if it's filling up quickly, meaning it's not draining very, very rapidly. It's not corresponding with your pour. And so if that fill level's going up quickly, I won't touch anything after the brew. I just let contact time do its thing. I might give it a little shake just to like ensure there are no peaks in the bed, just kind of level it out. But other than that, I don't really touch it. If I'm brewing it and it drains through really quickly, I go, okay, maybe I need to break up my only other pour into 2 pours. Or if it's not that bad, I might be like, all right, I'll pour with some turbulence and I'll give it a little swirl to slow it down a bit to get adequate contact time. So there are different ways of approaching it, but honestly, I rarely use wet WDT, and it's only because I'm 98% of the time I'm using a cone brewer, and the risk of tearing the paper filter is not something I want to really mess with. So yeah, I don't rely on that too often. Now I use it almost always when I'm doing a flat bottom brewer. A lot less risk of tearing any paper. So I do like that because I feel like it's a bit more controlled than swirling when it comes to fines ejection. That was really long. All right. There are different ways of filtering water at home. Which would you advise, considering moderate home use? I'm currently buying 5-liter jugs of demineralized water where I add bicarbonate and Epsom salt, but I do not like the waste I'm producing with this. Yeah, so I mean, probably the least waste is. I mean, I can't say this with certainty because I've not run numbers, but I'd have to imagine reverse osmosis is the least waste, and then you can use the water like when you're doing reverse osmosis, like there's, for instance, let's talk about skooma. Skooma is a reverse osmosis countertop system, and it produces wastewater essentially. And with that wastewater, you can use that to like water plants and whatnot. And so there's no real waste there if you have some sort of ecosystem at your home that is, that you have plants or something along those lines. So you can reuse that rejected water, or you can have it recirculate into your system. So reverse osmosis is probably the most effective way, I would imagine, and you'd need to use a lot less minerals with that because it's not completely demineralizing it. You'll just need to recalculate what your depending on where you're at, it's going to remove varying amounts of minerals. It's like 80 or 90%, depending on the efficacy of your RO and how seasoned it is. But I would imagine that's got to be the least invasive waste-wise. This one has the most likes. How you doing? I am doing well. I am very. I mean, I'm always pretty tired, but that's not as a result of what all I do. I mean, I'm always tired, regardless of. I'm an insomniac. I've been open about that, and so with my ADHD, I love having stuff to do. It keeps me busy, and then there are times where I will do nothing. Right, so I have been incredibly privileged to have this platform and to have you all as a community and to get to kind of push the boundaries of what we kind of understand with coffee, and all of that excites the absolute mess out of me. So I'm having a good time. I really enjoy the varying amounts of content I'm putting up, or not amounts, but the varying types of content I'm putting up, where it's like 1 week it's a review, one it's data, one it's theory, one it's pour over, one it's seasoning, whatever it might be. It's a lot of fun, and getting to work with the people within the industry I'm able to work with is just fantastic. So there's a lot of exciting things in the pipeline that are coming up that I'm stoked to share with you all. A lot of it I can't discuss, but that's going to be a perpetual thing. There's always going to be things I can't discuss, and things that I do leak that I probably shouldn't discuss, but I do anyway. But yeah, I mean, doing well. Yeah, everything's great. I like staying busy. I like coffee. It's a lot of fun. Let's see. How do different flow profiles impact flavor and extraction? Examples: blooming style shots, Slayer style shots, Londinium, straight nine, etc. So these, I'm assuming this is like a decent espresso machine user. To explain for those that may not know, a blooming shot is when you saturate the puck essentially, then you cut off flow to the puck. Now you can't do this with just any machine. If you have a machine that just turns on and off, and it has a solenoid valve. You're going to be depressurizing the puck and causing some issues with the extraction. But there are some cheap machines that have no solenoid, and so you can turn the shot off and you can bloom it manually, turn it back on. So the blooming shot is essentially saturating the puck and then turning off the flow of water to the group. So you're letting that pressure essentially fizzle out through the open area on the bottom of the basket. And so you're allowing kind of like a blooming mechanism, kind of like in a pour over. And then you hit it back with the pressure with the water flow through the puck. Then when you have a Slayer style shot, that's essentially running 1.5 mils a second water over the puck. For a certain specific amount of time, whatever you're wanting to do. And then you ramp it up to, I think, 8 mils a second. So that's doing a really long pre-infusion at a really low flow. And then you can ramp it up to that 9 bar with the heavier flow. Obviously, you're going to be stopped by the resistance of the puck to actually achieving the higher flow rate. But the idea is allowing you to use flow in order to control the pressure in a way. There are some limits in a Slayer espresso, but that is that style of shot. Londinium is a spring lever. So you're pulling down, you're getting kind of like steam pre-infusion from the steam boiler coming through, just destroying that puck. Not really. It's a good thing. I like the puck hammer. And then you lift it and it applies, 7-ish, 8-ish bar pressure. And then it descends down to whenever you stop the shot. And then straight nine is just blasting it with whatever the max flow rate is of your machine with an OPV or with a set parameter of 9 bars, so it doesn't go over 9. And that pump is going to be working in order to maintain that 9 bar, whatever it's set at, depending on where it's reading the pressure, etc. but it will maintain that until it's no longer able to, in which case the pressure will start to dip. So how do these different profiles impact flavor and extraction? Well, a lot of it is definitely coffee dependent and grinder dependent. So the different amount of fines, the different amount of application with the fill rate are all going to change greatly. So different espresso machines, it will all change greatly the impact onto it. So like the Londinium profile on the Decent is nothing like the Londinium, nothing like the Londinium. Yes, you can say you're emulating the pressure profile of it, but that does not mean much at all because the flow rate in the fill of a Londinium is so vastly different than the Decent. And this is something I'm really honing in on lately and really trying to help carve out a narrative of is the vast importance of not only flow rate but a fill rate of pucks and how you cannot replicate things that easily. So whereas the Decent can do a pseudo Londinium shot, it should not be called Londinium because it's quite different in cup, like incredibly different in cup. There's no real way to replicate what a spring lever is doing, especially when it has boiler pressure or steam pressure for the pre-infusion. But anyway, they're all going to have different impacts on coffee, but it will definitely stray coffee to coffee. So for me, what I've noticed is I simply just don't like Slayer shots. It's actually the only person who's pulled Slayer shots that I've enjoyed, and it's not been every shot that I've enjoyed, but I think Substance Cafe does a good job with it. That being said, they have a pretty unique puck preparation wherein they're using that essentially a knockoff hog or porky press in order to kind of aerate the puck. And they're doing a long pre-infusion with a lot of their shots, but then they're grinding coarsely enough though that the shot, once the pre-infusion's done, runs really quickly. So they're not doing standard Slayer shots where you grind it super finely, allow a 20 or 30-second pre-infusion, and then another 20 seconds for the full infusion. So when you do it like that, you're really only you're slowly wetting that puck because pressure's not going to come in for like 15 seconds. So you're getting relatively speaking, over extracted top layer of the puck and under extracted bottom layer of the puck, which I always get kind of a harshness whenever I'm doing whenever I've done Slayer shots. And I know they're really trendy, but I think it's more so the novelty of it. But I do know there are people who enjoy them, and that's great. When you're looking at like straight nine, I typically am not a fan of straight nine unless you're doing something weird where you're allowing the pressure drop to happen. So grinding coarser and doing faster shots like a turbo without changing OPV. But when you're doing a straight nine, the understanding is you're grinding finely enough so that the water debit or the water flow never really gets over 2-ish mils a second. So it's maintaining 9 throughout the entirety of the extraction for the most part without dipping because it doesn't really need to go past its inherent water debit, the pump's water debit. So I've never really been a fan of 9-bar shots. You can dial them in to taste pretty good, but the reality is that's a tiny little window, like very small. And that's why so many people get so frustrated with espresso, I think, is because the window is so small. Whenever you can lessen that flow rate going through, or you can change up the dynamics of the flow going through the puck, because pressure is part of that when you take into account Darcy's law, even though it's not fully applicable here. There is differences, right? So there's going to be massive differences, and I can't just say this is going to taste better with this will taste better with this. I do think there's an interesting theory that John Buckman put out about the 4 mother recipes of espresso that you can kind of Google and look up. We won't really go off on that tangent here, but what's your opinion about vibrating after extraction? I'm happy this was asked. I was curious if someone would ask this. So in case you're unfamiliar, at the most recent, a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, whatever, World Barista Championship in Busan, there were a couple of, innovations, and I'll put that in quotations purposely, but innovations at the world stage that are being looked at. One of them at least attempted to have scientific backing, whereas the other one is just kind of all speculative. One of them was vibration after your extraction. So putting essentially your cup of espresso onto a vibrating plate, and instead of stirring, maybe they stirred after. I didn't really watch the performance. I just read what has been written about it and watched the video that Ben from Cafe Masher sent me. But essentially, the brother of one of the 2 guys that run Cafe Masher in Switzerland, the brother who competed, he had a vibration plate, and originally the idea was to vibrate his puck for distribution purposes. So to put the portafilter on it, vibrate it down, which has been a theory around for ages. I've not found that it works too well, but I've not done any serious testing with it. But anyway, they decided not to use that, and he was messing around one day in practice and vibrated his cup of espresso afterwards, and felt like he noticed a big difference. And so they did a lot of tasting with it, and all of them decided there was a big difference. But of course, that's not scientific at all. That could definitely be very bias driven. But they reached out to Shahan, who is one of the heads over at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, so the coffee center there, and he's been working with them on the theory behind potential changes. And there's a lot of theory right now that's kind of going around, but I'm definitely following it and looking into it. I've not actually tried it yet, but I'm looking currently into the science and chatting with some people in the field. So I've been of Cafe Masher sent me their video right when they dropped it in order to make sure I got my eyes on it. And so I've been following along with that. The other one that was more speculative and doesn't have any that I've found scientific basis is using sound waves to affect extracted espresso, which I would assume has a similar effect to minor vibrations, but it seems pretty dubious at best from what I've seen thus far. Some of the explanations I've seen on the Instagram page of the company that makes the machine that does this, but I'll definitely do more looking into it. I'm always open-minded, obviously, but I can still be skeptical, right? Not mutually exclusive there. I can be open-minded and skeptical. So yeah. Any updates of the Farmer's First subscription idea? Yes. So it is, for those of you unaware, I am planning on launching a subscription, hopefully later this year, where I'm doing kind of like an uber transparent type of subscription model. So it'll be like one coffee a month, shipped globally, and we will be focusing, like, we're not going to be really posting, oh, this is a Lance project, this is a XYZ roaster project. But it'll be more so focusing on the farm and the producer, and along with it, I'll be trying to do a monthly interview with the producer of the coffee that we are showcasing. Obviously, that'll be more difficult with like Kenya coffees, for instance, but doing that and then doing like a brew along or a taste along once a month on this channel with the coffee that is released. And the idea is to really showcase transparency through all of this, not just with pricing, but every step of the way. I really like the name Transparency Coffee for it, so that's like kind of what I'm considering for the name of it. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. We're making some ground on it. We have to get the packaging and everything down, and yeah, and so there's a lot of good ideas that are going in with it as far as how we're going to do payments, because I want to ensure that it is a mutually beneficial thing. I want the producers to not just get like their asking price. I want to be able to pay the premiums, and I want to be able to do some sort of profit share on the releases. And there's a lot of things that are floating in the air right now that we're trying to nail down what is the most beneficial, because the idea with this is not a money grab. Like I said many times in many different areas, YouTube and all of the things related to it is not my breadwinner. Essentially, I still work full-time job and I do consulting. So all of this is more so because I believe in the potential of specialty coffee. I want to facilitate I want to facilitate change in progress and things like that. And I really think that this could have some ripple effects in the coffee world, hopefully at a roastery level and importer level, where they're considering how they're paying and how they're releasing information. So it's more of an exercise in that than anything else. But yeah, I'm excited about it. So I am working arduously on it. Thoughts and recommendations on Oreo V4. Ooh, that was a weird breath. I have not gotten one to mess around with the interchangeable bottoms. I have the Swarks, which is a similar concept. To be honest with you, I don't know how into like variable bottoms I am. I would just prefer no bottom, essentially, which is what I use on the Swarks. But even still, with the Swarks, it has the capability of shutting off the bottom and opening it. Maybe the Oreo V4 does as well. Like I said, I don't have one, but if I go flat bottom, it's usually that or like the next level. But like I said, I don't do them very often. But I would just do max open flow on the bottom. That's always when I'm open. I just want max flow always. Flow is everything, and I want to always maxed. You know what I mean? Obviously, the shaker approach of distribution is spoken about a lot more these days, thanks to your work. Well, thank you. I will say it's very interesting that at this past World Championship in the final 6, 3 of them used blind shakers. Granted, only one used only blind shaker, but I do like the winner used blind shaker, then autocomb. Another one used blind shaker, then something else, and then one used just blind shaker, who got like 4th or 5th or something. Now I'm curious if more would have used just blind shaker if the tech scores were not important. And the reason I say that is with the tech scores, they're looking at evenness of your puck prior to tamping. So they're not like they're working under an old system where, like, if you have a mound in the middle, which I think is a benefit of the blind shaker and for the extraction it provides, you get counted off for not having a level bed before tamping. That's why so many people use the NCD. And that's why, honestly, using usage in the World Barista Championship as a metric of success for a tool is not necessarily a helpful thing, because what they're looking for is proving that they are fully distributing the bed and making it level before tamping. So you have to prove that visually without talking about it, essentially, to the tech judges that are watching your every move. But anyway, it was interesting to see that many people use blind shakers when that's not really been a thing in the past. Even though Andre Ehrman, it should be noted, used that exclusively in 2017, following over 20,000 shots he pulled in preparation for Worlds. But not just for that, he was also giving the data to Zurich's coffee program. But in that time, he was like, I tried every distribution method, and what I walked on stage with was a blind shaker. So it's not new that the blind shaker is really helpful, but it's definitely now being realized. It's just people, it was just an unbelievable thing when people are like, well, WDT logically would be better, right? And I'm not saying it's not better. I'm not saying it's, I have the data to go off of and my own personal experience, and then the experiences others have shared with me. So got to stay humble with that, right? What approach have you landed on with the blind shaker? Do you shake for 5 seconds up and down, plop it on top of the larger size Works design funnel, drop it out? Do you drop from higher? All affects the pile and the portafilter. Not sure if this counts as one question or many. Just curious what your standard is. Yeah, so when I'm doing blind shaker, here it is, always within reach. What I'll do is, let me get a portafilter. Why is there not a portafilter in my Espresso? Oogle, where did you put it? I should have like 40 portafilters sitting around, and they're not. Here's one. Okay, so what I'll do is I take, where's the closest funnel? The flare funnel, whatever. This works too. What I'll do is I take the grounds, shake your booty. Honestly, I don't even do a full 5 seconds. I've not seen much difference between 3 and 5 seconds. I do think there is a difference if you go a lot longer, but for me, I was like, I can shave 2 seconds and I don't really see a difference. That's cool. So I shake. I kind of leave a little, floppy doppy wrist going on. Do a little shake here, and then I might do a little like that, like a bartender does before well, normally I'm holding it like this. Okay, let's just go through the process. I take it off the grinder. So here's the monolith. I take it off. I cap it. When I'm walking over, like if I'm grinding here and I'm walking over here where my scale is or whatever, shake, tap, tap, tap. And then I grab it, tap like that. And then with the portafilter, and I'm usually using a flat portafilter that lays flat on a table. So if that's the case, I'll have this laying on the table. And then I will drop it, about there. With taller funnels, it's like right essentially where the funnel meets the portafilter. But I mean, I would say I'm dropping from about this high. Honestly, unless you're dosing enough that it could overspill, you wouldn't even need the funnel necessarily, because this has a much smaller diameter than the mouth of the portafilter. See this? So when you lift, not only is it only falling out of that diameter there, but it's coming to the center because the bottom of the shaker is curved. So it makes a smaller diameter. So I've actually been able to use the blind shaker without a collar or with a collar. It doesn't matter. I guess I've mostly done it with a collar. But I can do it into like the Cremina basket, which is 49 mils. I have a collar for it, but I can go above it and shake into it without making a mess. Go straight into it because how it kind of comes down in a kind of a cone shape. So that's essentially what I do. It's important to do the cap top because there may be a little on the top. I do a little tap, tap, and then like that. Then once it's in here, I take the funnel off because it doesn't really once it's in there, as long as you're not way off with your aim, which should be easy, especially if you're using a funnel, I take it off and I just tap, 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 tamp. Easy. Would you be able to do a deep dive on brewing decaf for both pour over and espresso? You sprinkled in some tips here and there. Keep in mind storage. Yeah, so number one tip, decaf ages so incredibly quickly. All right, so I know you're like, oh, I got to rest my coffee 8 weeks because I'm drinking this really light roast coffee. Not with decaf. Decaf is going to go because it doesn't have much CO2. Okay, so there are going to be some massive changes inside. If you've found a coffee that you had 8 months off roast, even if it was light roast and you didn't store it very well, or it's just sitting in a sealed bag and you taste it, you might have that kind of like gross old coffee taste. I don't know how really better to describe it. It's kind of like this bittery, this like bittery kind of like meaty almost kind of taste. Well, that is going to happen to decaf really quickly. You're already fighting a meaty type of taste anyway, unless you find a really nicely processed decaf coffee that's high quality. And so the longer you let it sit, the worse it's going to get. Now, one of the questions is, should we freeze it, grind from freezing? I would recommend against grinding from freezing when it comes to decaf, especially. And the reason is because it has been shown that even though you get more uniform or less boulders, more uniform particles, less boulders, I should say, when you grind from frozen, you do create more fines. Okay. So you're already fighting a fight with fines whenever you're grinding decaf. And so it is important to like understand that when you're grinding from frozen, you'll create even more, and so it just compiles the issue. So you can always let it thaw for a few hours or something before grinding it. But if you want to freeze it, because that is going to be the best way probably to maintain it, or you can take the Weber tubes or something like that that takes all the air out, and you can just set them in room temp, and that'll help it keep longer. But yeah, that's the number one thing is you need to drink it fresh and immediately. So if you're buying decaf and you don't drink it very often, buy the smallest retail package you can and go through it as quickly as possible before buying the next one. The longer it sits, the worse it's going to get. All right. That's the decaf phrase. Longer it sits, worse it's going to get. All right. All right. It's not like normal coffees, even if it's lightly roasted or whatever. Are there innovations you're excited about that you see coming down the track anytime soon? Yes, one of them is very exciting, and I cannot talk about it, but you'll know as soon as possible. Yeah, very exciting stuff. When it comes to roasting, I'm very excited about the Hust P3000, but honestly, nothing super innovative there as far as like not changing the fundamentals of roasting. I'm not really sure of any changing of roasting going on. The Typhoon is an interesting unit. I don't think anyone's really grasped the potential that it is giving as far as its insane potential with convection and heat transfer. But yeah. Zerno updated review. I am in the process of obtaining another Zerno. I've been waiting because I don't want to skip people in line when it comes to getting the Zerno. And so I still have a prototype of the Zerno, actually. So I'm waiting in order to get a new one. And I was very particular. I really wanted the white one because they look kind of sick. So I'm waiting until one is built for me in order to purchase and to get over. What are proper pour-over techniques to get other than wash your honeyed coffees to taste good? I can't ever consistently get naturals or other exotically processed coffees to taste less bitter. I've tried lowering the water temp and grinding coarser. There's always some astringency lingering. So astringency, this can be inherent in green coffee. That should be noted. Astringency can be an issue with green coffee. If you're finding with loads of coffee, then it might not be a green coffee thing. It could be something you're doing. With those, my first thing was going to say lower water temp, but you said you've already done that. I'm curious how low you've gone. I would even go below 90 degrees Celsius with some of those, because a lot of the flavor is imparted during the processing. Okay, so there was a thesis that came out like 6 years ago, I think, that said 60% of a coffee's taste is directly imparted by the processing. So how much more so is that true for these wild processing methods when the majority of the flavor is because of that process? The hotter you go or the higher the extraction is, the more you're going to get coffee coming through and not as much the process. And that's actually a big reason why a lot of these World Brewers Cup champions are brewing at such low extractions, is because they're using process forward coffees, which are allowing for these exotic cut profiles that you're like, oh my God, they're getting that taste. And yeah, they are, but it's not as reflective as terroir as it is of the process itself, like with co-ferment and things like those. And so when you're brewing these coffees, you need to really tame in the extraction variables, not necessarily under extract it. You don't want to go so coarse that it's river rocks, because then you will get that kind of bitterness. But you want to ensure that you are balancing delicately the line between fineness of grind and the water temperature. I would actually recommend doing a normal grind size, maybe even a little finer, going really cool on the water in very low agitation. I have found that the most drinkable, crazy processed coffees I've been able to have is using something like a mellow drip technique. Now, normally I'm not a big fan of the mellow drip because it causes a lot of bypass and a lot of inconsistency through the bed. which obviously makes sense. It's obviously going to cause quite a bit of bypass because you're not allowing new routes of water to get through the bed. It's just kind of pulling up on top, and then it wants to go around the edges because it's easier to go around the edge than through the bed. But anyway, there's been some decent attempts with that. But yeah, lessening the amount of agitation and increasing the grind size to allow for easier extraction with lower temp water is always a good way to go. Like even maybe down to 85 degree. How do you pick water temp for a brew? I normally don't ever go above 95 degrees Celsius. So when I'm brewing, I take into account the roast level is one of the first things I take into account. Processing, I take into account. And then honestly, the perceived density of the bean, not the actual density of the bean, but the perceived density of the bean. If it's like a Margohipe or a Pacamara, that's very low density in perception. And so with that, I might do a little cooler water. If it's a high density in perception, like Heirloom, Ethiopia, something like that, I'll probably go higher. Because I found that the lower density in perception and the higher density kind of extract, more difficult or less difficult, right? So I take all that into account. The heavier the process, the cooler the water, the more closer to wash or traditional wash, the hotter the water. Yeah, I don't normally go over like 95. I do find that I get some bitterness that is attributed to water temp as I go higher and higher, closer to boiling. So obviously that's changed over the years, and that happens, right? What are the steps to design a new burr? Computational tools, expert knowledge, or trial and error? Most of it is trial and error, I'll be honest. There are a lot of shared theories in the burr making world. As far as how the different elements on a burr face affect the path and the fracture dynamics of the bean itself, but the vast majority is trial and error. So what you do is you create a baseline burr that is not too different from things on the market. So you're taking into account the elevation of the initial pre-breaker and how high it goes at its peak. You take into account the smoothness of that pre-breaker and how it transitions to the second stage, how long the second stage should be, and how long and how deep that third final cutting phase is. There are normally those 3 steps to a flat burr. Obviously, the smaller the burr, likely it goes down to like 2-step phase. But yes, and you can have 2-step with bigger burrs, and I think more and more should come out actually at 2-step. For especially these grinders that have pre-breakers. But I mean, a lot of it's trial and error. There's no hard data on what these different faces are doing because the grinding process is so chaotic in general. So yeah, it's a lot of CAD filing and changing different heights and different depths of cuts and figuring out what throughput is necessary. So how deep, how wide are the exit holes, or are they even wide at all? Or are they flush? Whatever, kind of like that. So when I say exit holes, I mean, when you're looking at this, you see how there's exit holes there, right? So you have exits there, but on things like maybe this, there are no exits. See that? So you're looking at outfall, you're looking at throughput, you're looking at the pre-breaking and how it's affecting the coffee. You're theorizing over whether or not the beans being broken up too quickly, which can cause an overloading of the final stage of cutting. So yeah, a lot of it is, like I said, it's just using logic and in theory based off of past successes in burr designs. But a lot of times you have 2 completely different burrs that act similarly and you have no idea why. Like for instance, I think the Shuriken light medium burr at 98 mils tastes pretty similar. I mean, not very, but pretty similar to the current EK43 burrs if they're both aligned well and you dial in well. I think they can both give similar attributes and they are very different geometries. So it's all very wild. Let's see. What's your favorite mug glassware for filter and espresso? I mean, this is pretty high up there. I do actually use it more than I'd like to admit. It reminds me of my childhood. And when I was a kid, I had Dragon Ball Z pillows and like the comforter and the sheets. And I had a Dragon Ball Z poster. And I was like, I remember thinking, like, people are like, oh, you'll outgrow Dragon Ball Z. And I did for a bit, or I thought I did. And those are sad years, the forgotten years. But I remember thinking as a kid, I'll never outgrow it. It's the coolest show ever. How the heck would anyone with a brain outgrow Dragon Ball Z? And of course, I came back to it because it's incredible. But I do get a lot of happiness when I use this. I got it at a little Christmas market up in Vigo, Spain last Christmas. It's like an hour drive north from where I'm at. And I've used the absolute mess out of it since. But I'm obsessed, as you all know, with Magnolia Mountain. Magnolia Mountain is the first ever collab I did as a creator. It has the LH logo on the bottom. This is made in conjunction with Arita Porcelain Lab in Japan. It's very expensive drop. I was shocked so many sold as they did. I think we sold like 500 or 600, which I was very shocked by because they were like $80 per cup. And it's because it's because the way they're made is just an expensive process, right? Now I love the form factor. This is like what Magnolia Mountain is known for, is this form. So anything that you see like this is just simply a rip off of this, which is fine. That happens. But I love this form factor, how it feels in my hand. I love everything about it. It's almost a little translucent too, that white is. In fact, before the collab, the reason they reached out for a collab is I bought one of their releases before they did this with me. Their first release with Arita, I bought 2 cups or 3 cups, and I used it all the time in YouTube videos and on Instagram, and they reached out to do a collab, and I was like, heck yeah. So we did a solo launch with just me and them. We are working on another one, potentially with a wooden cup. So I know that sounds weird. I promise you, if there's any weird feeling on the lips, it will not be a thing. I hate rough ceramic. So for instance, I'm actually not a very big fan of anything that's like a rough ceramic. It has to be glazed ceramic for me to enjoy it at all. But even that, I'm not a huge fan of. But like, as an example, I do not like, where is it? I think, oh, it's right here. For an example, even though this is beautiful, there is a texture here. You can kind of hear it. When I rub, you can hear that's kind of, it's textured. I don't like texture on my lips when I'm sipping coffee. I don't like it. It's a very frustrating thing for me. I want it to be smooth as smooth can get. That's why this is fine. This is smooth. I mean, you can see the reflections. It's smooth as smooth gets. But so I'm going to test out this wood. They tell me it's like as smooth as glass, essentially. So it would be cool to reclaim an old style. I love old stuff like the old levers and stuff, but the history in general always fascinates me. So we might be working, I think, with a Japanese company on creating some wooden cups. That would be incredibly nice in the same form factor as these, but I'll give you updates as they come. Favorite roaster that you constantly go back to, daily driver most often? How do you typically brew your daily driver? I would say probably Tim Wendelboe is my most common in-house coffee. Probably, especially the African coffees from Wendelboe. Yeah, that's probably my most common in-house coffee. And now I have like 30 pounds or 15 kilos of. It's hot in here. It's hot in Portugal. I need to turn on the AC. Now with Onyx and EU, and I'm kind of controlling the roast. I have like 15 kilos of that coffee as well, and it's very good. So, I mean, so that's like, I rarely like to bring up Onyx because I work for them. It's incredibly biased, but yeah. And then how do I typically brew? V60, honestly, V60. And I go between using my EK43, my Pietro, or I just got in this 2 different motors for hand grinders. One is from Madcap, which I did, or not Madcap. Yeah, Madcap, which I did a video on their old one 2 years ago, but I just got a new one from them. And then I also got the Flare Power Tower. And so I've been using ZP6 on those as well. But that's, I do those. And then I've been using the Coffetech with coarse burrs, which is right. Shiza. No, it's this one. This is the Max 2 and has coarse burrs in it. I've been using that as well a lot lately. But yeah. When are you going to do a series on roasting some juicy coffee? That's a great question. I do want to do a roasting videos, but I don't think I've been waiting on doing it. I do have a host. I love it, and I don't love roasting coffee. It's pretty time consuming and a lot of work, but I do love the host and how easy it is. I did, for people who don't know, I did start roasting in 2016. I worked on a small, Chinese 1 kilogram roaster and also on a 12 kilogram 1984 Probot that we had refurbed. And so I roasted on that for a while. Then with Onyx, we have Diedrichs and Strongholds and now a Loring. But I never loved roasting, so it was pretty monotonous. And as someone with ADHD, I couldn't just sit and roast all day. But I'm very fascinated with roasting. And that's actually one of the reasons Scott Rayo and I initially became really tight, as I just inundated him with questions. I read all of his roasting stuff. And then I've read, a lot of from Coffee Mind with Morton Munchau, because it's very differing opinions on roast approach. And yeah, I've talked with as many people as I can to kind of get as good of an understanding as possible with current theory out there. But it's hard. The issue is I'm very confident videos would not do well at this current state. Even with Hoffman, when he did a roasting video, it's one of his lower viewed videos. And so I would like for it to not, I would like for it to break even on my channel, essentially. So all the resources I would put into a roasting video or series, I would like for it to at least break even. And I'm not sure currently I have enough pool in the world of YouTube to make that even break even currently. You'd be surprised. The videos don't pay as much as people think. There's a lot of misinformation online. Like for instance, to be honest with you, my most viewed video is my 22-minute video on how to steam milk. My first video ever posted. It's got like 1.1 million views. And the whole time that's been posted, I've gotten like $3,000. It's 3 years, $3,000, and that's with 1.1 million views. And that is only that much money because it was so popular. I have a higher CPM, which means I get more money per 1,000 views or whatever than I do with other videos. So when other videos don't do very well, not only do I not get a lot of views, but the CPM is very low. And it's because essentially advertisers, they're not willing to put as much money towards the video because it's not getting as much viewing, or if the average view is low. Like there's so many different variables in it. So when you look up what do YouTubers make and it gives you a single number, I mean, you already know that's wrong. I know of other YouTubers, I won't name them, that have a lot higher CPM than me, even though their channel may not be as successful. They'll get paid more per 1,000 views than I will. And a lot of it, I have no understanding as to why that is. But anyway, I definitely need things to kind of break even. Yeah. So that is when I'll do that. All right. I'll answer, I think, 2 more because I'm getting really hot in here. Holy cow. A video on palate development would be great. Are the scent kits worth it for at-home coffee enthusiasts? So the scent kit is called a Nell kit, or Linnell kit, sorry. If people are wondering, they're solid. They're good. They can help you hone in skills. Absolutely. Man, I am very hot in here. It is a hot day in Portugal, I'll tell you what. And standing here is stuffy. I may turn on the AC, even though it's going to make some noise. I apologize. I'm getting hot. All right. Woo! Sorry if I just blasted your eardrums. So, any taste exercises you would recommend for learning how to distinguish between sour, bitter, acidic? That is a very difficult question to answer, sour versus bitter. The best thing I always tell people is honestly Google. Go to Google Scholar and type in sour versus bitter debate or something like that. And you will find so many papers that talk about this phenomenon where it's like very difficult to differentiate between the two. I guess my recommendation would be to get things that are notably sour and notably bitter and taste them and really try to just sit and consider what's going on in your mouth and how your brain is reacting to the sensations. Because all taste is memory, right? So everything you're doing, you need to try and place with it a specific memory so that as you're tasting in the future, you can recall upon something, right? So yeah, Linnell kit is solid. They're expensive though. You can likely borrow one from a local roaster or something if you're really nice. A lot of them will tend to have them. And yeah, so Linnell kits are cool. They help you with aroma, which is obviously the number one way to taste things. Any hygiene recommendations, tongue scraping, nasal rinses, or best practices? What would you recommend when someone drinks between slurps? Room temp water, flat, or carbonated? So I don't really drink between slurps, to be honest with you. If I were to, it would be just room temp water. And I'll do it sometimes with espresso tastings. But whenever you taste enough coffee, which I'm assuming most of you won't get to that level because you're not professionally doing it. So it's not 100% necessary to sit there and taste for hours. But when you're tasting, when you're doing like a 40 bowl set, or, you're tasting like I did the other day, 40 espressos in a row, you kind of get kind of used to it. But yeah, if you're doing like a small little, I think a little carbonated water with like really thin bubbles or something, or something along those lines. If you're doing a small tasting is nice. But yeah, room temp water is something I tend to do. So I did that during the espresso tasting. After every couple of sets, is I would chug some room temp water or just swash it around in my mouth and spit it out. But yeah, a lot of it's just practice and getting to a point where you're able to taste through it, right? So you definitely like. But a big tip I will give for tasting coffees is always have a benchmark coffee on the table. So get a coffee that to put on the table as a benchmark. That is something a lot of people don't do. And also condition your palate before you get into a cupping. So brew a cup of coffee and drink it, or get it in your mouth before you start cupping. You need to have something in your mouth prior to going into it, because it can skew, especially the first cup. But you want to ensure that you're doing something like that. When can one stop buying coffee gear? My wife's asking. Never. No, I'm kidding. I've preached about FOMO. Whenever you are brewing coffee, so it's difficult, because I would say whenever you're brewing coffee and you're happy with it, but then people quickly will get online, they see someone else's setup, and they start thinking, oh, maybe my coffee is not good enough. You need to be confident in the fact that your coffee is tasting good, and that most of the differences can be achieved with buying better coffee. So yes, there's like heat damage on smaller burr coffee on smaller burr grinders, and there will be a difference when you go to a bigger burr grinder. Yes, there are differences between. Honestly, that's one of the bigger things. Obviously, with water, that is the one thing I would definitely recommend people get into is ensuring they have good water. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing because gear acquisition syndrome, FOMO, are big things, fear of missing out, and so seeing other people get something that you might want or that might seem like it's really promising is a difficult thing to kind of overcome, and you might lust after it. Now, a reason I've said this a lot lately, but I'm gonna say it again. A reason I do so many kind of in-game machine reviews is not for the sake of doing these reviews. There are a lot of people who don't watch those videos because they're like, I'll never afford that. I'm never going to get that. So why would I watch the video? The reason I do these videos is not to review the product for the sake of reviewing the product. It's because I can learn so much from these different grinders, and then I'm able to teach about it. So for instance, and I've told this story before, but it's the most obvious example, and I feel comfortable talking about this because I know it's fine. There are other examples, but I've already used this, so it's the only one I'm going to use. But I did my Bentwood video early on, and people were upset because mostly at that time I'd been doing really cheap products. And they're like, well, why would you do something that's almost $3,000? Well, the reason is because there were so many exciting things about that grinder that I wanted to be out in the world. Now, yes, people don't need me in order to know that those things exist, but a lot of people do rely on what I'm putting out there in order to keep up with what's going on in coffee. And I tend to be one of the more connected people with developments in the world of coffee than most. And so when I did the Bentwood video and I talked about a lot of the innovations in it, or not just innovations, some of them weren't necessarily innovations, but they were more bringing to the topic intentionally things that are important in coffee grinders. And the reason I say it like that is Malkonig has done some of these innovations years past, but they're kind of lost in history and no one talks about them. They don't talk about it. And so like using an auger as an intentional pre-breaker was a very important thing. And now Malkonig has used augers, and they have designs on the augers to pre-break beans, but they've never intentionally used the verbiage an auger as a pre-breaker. Now, the clearance between the chamber and the auger on an EK43 is actually pretty similar to that on a Zerno. So you have that before, or as a Bentwood. So you have that before, but no one was really talking about it. So what I did in the Bentwood video is because that was part of their marketing, I kind of hyped on that, was excited about it, and that people are now looking at this intentionally. From that, Vel from Zerno told me he actually took a lot from my video on the Bentwood in order to create his Zerno. So I remember when I first started hearing rumors about Zerno, I reached out and I was like, hey, are you going to post anything about your grinder, any videos or anything before you launch it? And we started talking, and he was like, actually, a big inspiration came from your Bentwood video. Like the way that you talked about the microns on the dial size and how smooth the dialing was. That was a big inspiration, was my review on the Bentwood that created the Zerno, or how I talked about the alignment and how the things fit in there was a big inspiration for how we did the Zerno and the alignment there. My discussion on the auger as pre-breaker was a big inspiration for how we did the auger on the Zerno. So, and that's one of many tales I can tell on how my reviews on some of these more in-game grinders has changed the way some manufacturers have looked at creating their products. Now, the people who are doing the R&D may not be stoked that this is happening. And in fact, I bring up some innovations Coffeetech makes, and in my video recently, and in it, I talk about how you should watch this video anyway because this can cause ripple effects in the industry. And I'm sure they're like, well, crap, I don't want cheaper grinder companies to take some of these ideas and implement them. But the reality is, it's going to happen. Because at some point someone else will have the idea independently. And so I just like to facilitate the conversation and to enlighten people on what is going on and what steps are being taken in order to overcome certain deficits in the current way things are made, if that makes sense. So that was a long response to when can you stop buying coffee gear. All right, let's do one more question. Actually, there was one up here that had 7 emoji reacts and I didn't respond to it. How often do you clean your machines? When do you just do a quick back flush, and when do you actually take off the shower screen and soak parts? Do you ever fully clean machines if you're going through them so quickly? Good question. Every time I do multiple shots, I will back flush. I never descale, but it's because I'm very intentional on the water I use in my machines. Normally, especially recently, about 6 months ago or so, I switched to using Pavlis almost exclusively, and I just remineralize after pulling my espresso in order to get my desired cup. And that's because Pavlis water causes no scale and no corrosion. So that's something that people have to walk a thin line with, is if they want the minerals in their espresso, they will put it in their water, and then they just have to at some point descale. I don't want to have to. I have so many machines. I don't want to go through descaling them. That's freaking annoying. So I no longer even think about descaling because I use Pavlis water, and then I will just remineralize after espresso extraction, and it's been a good old time. Now, back flushing, though, obviously is important, and I do that pretty often. A lot of these newer machines will kind of alert you when you need to do it, but I do it pretty often. Like I said, when I'm pulling multiple shots for testing, if I just do 1 or 2 shots in a day, I probably won't back flush, to be honest with you. I'll rinse it, or I'll wipe off the screen or something, and then if I end up not pulling a shot for a week, I'll be like, oh, well, I remember. I have a very good memory, and so if like in a week I realize, oh, I pulled shots last week and I never did anything, I'll go, well, I'm probably not going to use this machine for a bit. So then what I'll do is I'll back flush it, and then I'll drain the machine and set it off. Or because I know the water has no big issue in it, I might let it sit for a bit before doing anything. But a big thing I have to do is I continuously have to drain boilers to put machines in storage, because I can't use all the machines I have at once, right? So instead of letting stagnant water sit in, I have to drain boilers. So I do that pretty often. So if you're storing your machine, I would highly recommend draining your boiler. I wish more machines made that easy. I was very, very happy that the Rancilio Silvia, for instance, has you can automatically drain your boiler. It's brilliant. That's what more and more machines should do. You can do it. The Decent doesn't have a boiler to drain, but you can get the water out of the system. The dual boiler, you can get the water out of the system with those 2 screws on front. You just release it and it drains the boiler. It's that stuff I think is so important on these machines, because, you know, you go on a vacation for 3 weeks, you don't want to, or you leave or whatever, you don't use it for a while, you don't want stagnant water sitting in it. So that stuff is really important to me. Not all machines have it. The most frustrating one to me was the Sanremo U, because getting to the boiler to drain it is a freaking hour-long process, and that really annoys me. But yeah, so I back flush if I'm pulling a ton of shots. I think it's pretty important. I wouldn't say you need to do it if you're pulling 2 shots a day. Maybe do it once a week or so. I think there is such a thing as like over cleaning. You don't need to keep messing with the machine. It's not going to be gross unless you're using gross water, in which case you probably shouldn't deserve an espresso machine. But yeah, I think that is... Did you check out the Puck Press WDT auto tool? This is the last one I'll say. Yeah, I've seen it. I've not touched it, but honestly, I can't really imagine. It's like, from watching it, it looks like it'll have the same fundamental flaw that the autocomb has, which is forcing grounds for the edges. So if you watch it closely, the center barely moves around, and it's mostly the edges that are moving from that automated needle. So yeah, I'm curious about it, sure, but I can't imagine it'll do any better. Now, I will say, in talking with Samo recently, he pulled like 50 shots the other day, and his text me is he was testing out something, but he said, but before even getting to those results, I'm just doubling down on how brilliant the blind shaker is. It's just like the way it works. I still don't know the full mechanisms of it. There are a lot of great theories out there, but it just does what it should do, and it does a really good job. And like, I mean, you don't need the Weber one, right? Although it's a lot less retention than some of the knockoffs, because the finishing on it is so much better. But yeah, I mean, mine is all scratched up now because I've dropped it a million times. I'm a very clumsy person. You've seen me break brewers on previous streams, but I mean, it's still, as long as the inside's fine, it's all good. But yeah, I mean, it is rough. Don't you think if I was on pay from Weber, I'd have like 10 of these? No, I just have one. It's one that came with my EG1. Huh. Losers. Okay. Let's look at the live chat. I've not even done that at all. Most recent ones. Do you think the Zerno has to worry about heat damage with 64 millimeter as much as other grinders? No, not as much as other 64 millimeter grinders. And it's because of the pre-breaking auger. That helps with heat damage a lot. And especially with the real, like, I understand wanting variable augers. I would just want it to be essentially as slow as possible while it's breaking it, just kind of crushing the beans slowly as it goes through and then dropping them into the burrs. Now, the biggest thing that Vel needs to do, and I talked about this in the Coffee Tech video, these people that have intentional pre-breakers, redesign your freaking burrs to not have pre-breakers on them. You don't need pre-breakers on your burrs if you're pre-breaking the bean. You're wasting valuable real estate. Like, the reason to go with bigger burrs is because there's more real estate for potential cut grooves. And I'm like, when is someone going to listen to me? I've been whining about this for years. Redesign the burrs. Vel knows, I've someone, told Vel that I said this, or forced me to tell Vel or something, and he's been thinking about it. But other grinder companies that have these mechanisms that pre-break, freaking redesign your burr. You know what I mean? Like, you're wasting valuable real estate that could really improve heat damage, first of all, but also the particle distribution. So when I say heat damage, what do I mean? Well, right now, when you look inside the burr at the size, look how big it is for beans to get in. It's that big so that beans can make their way in, and these fins chop them, and then they can go further into the burr itself. When you already have tiny chunks of coffee, you don't need that. They'll go in immediately. And so they're immediately going to the finishing stages. And then you have a clog. And that's where the heat damage is occurring, because the throughput is very slow. And it's because you're clogging the end. If you slowly made those grounds smaller, then they'll all go through and they'll be able to spread out the fractures essentially along the face of the burr. So, like, come on, guys, it's not rocket science. I mean, it is an unknown territory, but get out of your comfort level. Obviously, time is a factor, but it would be great to get the in-game review alongside the quality affordable reviews. No, I still do a quality or affordable reviews. I've not done a grinder in a bit, I don't think. I think the last one was like the Opus or the Encore, which, granted, was a while ago. No, I did DF, and I did the whole 64 millimeter breakdown with the DFs and stuff not too long ago, like 2 months ago. Honestly, a lot of it is just, I have all this stuff. I'm way behind on videos, and so I put out what I'm interested in at the moment. And so I've been doing some secret stuff, and so I've been very interested in grinders again, always. And it's hard to explain, because ADHD. Someone had asked a question, and they got like no likes, and this will be the last one. I've said that 50 times. How do I have ADHD and maintain an interest in coffee? So for those of you that aren't aware, ADHD tends to force you to get really good at a lot of things, but then abandon them before you're great at it. And so you're constantly looking for a dopamine hit. So you kind of hop around and get really good at a lot of things. Now, I still do that. I still hop around and have a lot of different interests, but I have been able to maintain a hyper focus. That's a term that is often used with people with neurodivergency, etc. That is, you kind of get handicapped in a way where you can only focus on something, and like nothing else can break your concentration on it. And you go through waves of that with different things. Now, how have I been able to maintain focus on coffee? Well, that is a good question. Honestly, I think a big part of it is that there are so many different facets to coffee. And you see this reflected in my videos, that I'm able to hop around as the dopamine allures me, right? So I can, for instance, I love history. I'm a big history nerd. I love history, different parts of the world, different eras. And with coffee, you have a ton of history, obviously. And so I can jump into the lever world, and I can get fascinated with the history of coffee, and even do weird videos where we talk about the effect of World War II on the emergence of coffee with sociologist Noah Berger. Or I can, hop into like the museum, the Mumak Museum, and do things like that. Or I can get really into chemistry specifically and work alongside Samo and Hendon and look at different theories that are going along there, and doing different data acquisitions and analyzing it. Or I can get really into mechanics and engineering, and I'll work alongside friends who are engineers in order to fully understand, or more understand, these different things. I've also had friends that are electrical engineers, and I've read up on different. So what I'm saying is I'll go into these rabbit holes that are interesting to me because of a certain end game I'm wanting to hit. So I go around, I'll learn different fields within the world of coffee. Coffee is just such a wide-reaching subject that I am able to have my attention span go all over the place within a single subject. So it's like one of the biggest things in the world, right? Coffee is such a big thing when it comes to sociology, when it comes to anthropology, when it comes to science, when it comes to all these different humanities and things like that, that I'm able to be pretty encapsulated with it. And honestly, it does drive. I mean, whenever, fun fact, whenever I'm doing these reviews, especially with more end game machines, because I don't want to be as arrogant as to think that my experience is above all. So what I'll do, because I don't want bias going into this, even though that's impossible, I have bias. For instance, I'll be completely honest with you, straight up. I was very biased against the Cafetech when I started my process with it of reviewing. And the reason is because I ran into some Cafetech fanboy trolls and it really irritated me. Like really irritated me. I like when I did my P100 review, which wasn't the most glowing of reviews, there were some P100 fanboys that were like kind of rude, I guess, but the majority of them were like, no, it's fair. We don't really care. Like I'm different. I don't agree. That's fine. And that to me, wonderful. That's great. I love that. But my goodness, the vitriolic responses by some of these people when I made an offhanded comment in a live I did a few months ago was very frustrating. And it made me, because everyone has pettiness in them. I wanted to not like it because I did. If I'm in my mind, it was like, if I like this grinder or if I give it any type of praise, they're going to feel vindicated. And I can't stand the thought of that. So I was very biased coming into it, I'll be honest. That being said, I do have really nice things to say about it. Obviously, I point out cons, but the fact that I do say nice things about it should be really impressive because I was so heavily biased against it coming into it due to the interactions with kind of some of the acolytes of the brand itself. That's to say, don't ever be so fanboy about a certain company that you're like that. To anyone out there listening, like you bought something, you don't need to defend it with your heart, soul, and vitriol. You don't need to. It's fine. If you enjoy it, you enjoy it. Don't worry about it. Okay. Anyway, wow, why was I talking about that? Oh, with Cafetech, I was talking about what I was doing with it, and I completely got off track. Someone remind me where I was. Does coffee make you tired with your ADHD? I don't really know. I'm always tired, so I can't really. I'm very bad at saying, "Oh, I ate this food and it's upset me." I'm very bad at making correlations within my body. I'm very good at introspection and retrospection, but I'm not good at connecting my body to outside influences and how it's affected me. So I could, like, for instance, I could be lactose intolerant and I just would have no idea, or I could be like, what do you call it when you can't have what is it? What's the other intolerance? Gluten-free or something. I could be like that, and I just wouldn't know it because I don't make the connections. You were talking about that being your last question. Yes, but I don't remember why I brought up Cafetech, because it was a good point I remember. In-game long quality reviews. In-game and quality reviews. I was talking about Cafetech. I was talking about someone else hit me up. What was I saying? How do you keep engaged with coffee with your ADHD? Yeah, I know that was the question I was responding to, but I can't remember why I brought up Cafetech. I'm excited about the review. It's like it'll be like an hour long. It'll be a really good review, very in depth. Maybe I was talking about the in depthness of it. No, I just went on a little rant about not being so much of an acolyte of a brand to be rude. Talking about bias. Talking about augers and pre-breakers and the science behind coffee that keeps you engaged. Yes, I really like that. I cannot remember. This is so frustrating. Pull the funnel apart. You get any new espresso machines you're working on, reviews upcoming? I know. I appreciate you, Dan. We're getting there, but new espresso machines you're working on, reviews. Well, the Espresso, I've had that for a while. I take a while with these different. I was talking about reading and yeah. So I also, yes, now I remember. Okay, thank you bringing up the espresso machine, and then that got me onto how long I take with them. So when I'm doing these big boy reviews, especially, in order to not have as little bias as possible, that's where it was going. That's where I went on my tangent. Now I remember ADHD got nothing on me. Okay, so I was talking about how I don't like going into these reviews with like bias. Obviously, I'm going to see things said about grinders and whatnot all over the place. Like I know going into certain companies what some of the vast opinions are, but I try not to like intentionally look at opinions on grinders, especially by the cult followings of these different grinder companies. They all have their own little cults, right? And so what I'll do is I'll do testing and have my own kind of opinions formulating, but I'm not so arrogant as to think my opinion's the only one that counts, right? So what I do the day before I the day or two before, mostly the day before, because I'm very last minute. The day before I film, I will go through and read as many forums as I can and posts about the machine I'm doing to get a good sense of user experience, real user experience, typical issues, typical complaints. I'll try to find threads that are negative and threads that are positive. I'll go to the actual, like I went to the actual Cafetech forum for this one, but I also went to Home Barista and read as many forums as I could. I read all of them on the Macs too, but I read as many as I could about the Macs. I did it on EAF. I did it on Reddit. And I spent literally the night I was up till 4 a.m. I spent 6 or 7 hours reading as many threads as I could before I made my review. And it's because I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that, a broader experience pool from which I can draw is a very important thing to take into account as I finalize thoughts. So, so I had 3 months with the Max 2, and I had about 9 months or so with the Max 1. And then I also have 7 hours of reading other people's opinions in order to validate or to bring up certain things that might be valid, different opinions. So I'm very, that also keeps me enthralled because I love reading, and reading, threads is still reading. So I can hyper focus on that. So that night when I did 7 hours in a row, I didn't even realize the time had gone by. I just kept reading threads. I just kept reading threads and kept reading threads and kept reading threads because I think it's very important. And it's something that I have more so put into place in the past 9 months or so. How arduous I am with that than I had previously. So it's a relatively new approach to reviews, I guess, is doing this. But I found it to be very, 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 very helpful and allows for, I think, a more useful and universal review because I'm taking into account other people's experiences and trying to weed out what is user error and all these different things by reading troubleshooting, like other people coming in trying to help who might know the machine more, have it longer. And then every so often, I will reach out to someone I think is like a quote unquote expert on said machine and get their opinions as well to weigh against my own and to test out. And so like with the Cafetech, for instance, this is just a for instance, because it's the most recent one I did. I talked a lot with user Long PVO and EAF because he's an engineer and brilliant. And he exclusively uses the Macs. And so I chatted with him a lot about it as well. But yeah, so I take this stuff very seriously, but all that to say, ADHD got nothing on me because I have learned how to utilize it as a superpower, right? And so the only thing that frustrates me is when I forget my line of thought like I did a second ago, but then we refound it. Now, espresso machines, tracking, anything new? Yeah, I'm working on the Synesso. I've been having it for a while. I did the Linea a lot faster. I didn't have the Linea nearly as long, and I know it's an expensive machine and in-game for many. The reason I did that one so quickly is honestly the differences inside were very minute to the original. And the reason my review seemed to give people the impression that I really liked or was really impressed, it wasn't that. The reason my review came off the way it did, if anyone was curious, is because La Marzocco is reticent to push the envelope in any given area. You cannot expect them to make the changes that the nerdy community wants. They will never change that paddle to be pre-infusion and full infusion. That's not happening because they are driven by business. They're business first and foremost. They're not innovation. They're honestly one of the least innovative companies out there. And that might sound like a diss or something, but it's really not. They are concerned about legacy and about cash flow, and they're owned by DeLonghi now. So it's all about making numbers. And so what they're doing is they're making solid machines that don't venture away from incredible accessibility. So they don't want to have this, paddle that is going to confuse the majority of their buyers. You would think that most people shelling out $6,000 for a mini are nerds. No, the majority are just normal home users. So many celebrities and just affluent people who want something nice in their kitchen. So many of their customers are people just buying it because it's the La Marzocco. And they know that, and obviously it reflects in their decisions. So for what they're trying to do, I mean, it is a good machine. It does what they're wanting it to do. Is the price tag crazy? Yeah, it's crazy, but so is a friggin', Porsche 911 or whatever. And so it's for a specific audience. And for that, judging it for what it is, I didn't feel the need to be negative because in reality, I could sit there and complain that they didn't do what I wanted, but that's not the company to do what I want. They never will do what I want because they're not an innovative company and they don't really care to push the boundaries. And that's, I can have issues with it. And I probably would have more issues with it if they weren't as successful as they are, because then it would be like, well, you're not listening. This would make your company better. But they don't care, right? So why would I sit there and moan about the lack of innovation when in reality that's not at all? That's like complaining about um, McDonald's for not giving me a Michelin star burger, right? That's not their point. They have their business model in place, and for what it is, it's doing that job obviously pretty well because they're, especially in Europe, good grief, the line never stops. So that's I try to approach all my reviews with the understanding of what the intention is. So when I get negative, it's when I think an intention is not carried out well, or I disagree with the philosophy, or along those lines, right? Like if La Marzocco were to say that they bar none have the best XYZ, then I would be negative, right? But what they're saying is just more so we have listened to some of the customers' desires, like a timer and like, whatever, these different things, and we improve thermal stability. Okay, you did what you wanted to do. You did a good job with it. Would I spend $5,000, $6,000 on this? Heck no. And that's why I added a pinned comment saying that, just so people aren't confused. I would not spend $6K on this machine. Heck no, I'd much rather get a Lily Bianca or something that is more flexible, especially if I'm going out of the box. Now, if someone said, here's a free Bianca, here's a free La Marzocco Linea Mini, I'm taking the free Mini, not even to sell it, but because I would modify it. But most people aren't going to modify, right? And so, it's like that. God, I keep going on rants because I like to hear my voice. What can I say? Not really, but, well, actually, kind of, but. Will you be testing the upcoming fellow brewer? I'm sure I will. I got to buy one. Can you recommend a great espresso grinder for modern light acidity forward coffee? I have a DE1, a key for more traditional espresso, and an 078, which has filter handled. Great espresso grinder for modern light acidity forward coffee. Well, it depends on your budget. That's something we'll talk about that in Discord. Go to Grinders and tag me there, and when we'll talk about that. Anyway, okay, I think that is all for today. I knew I wouldn't do 30 minutes. We're at an hour 20 because I'm a silly Billy boy. Thanks for joining. Thanks for listening to my rants. Hopefully some of them were helpful. Hopefully the responses to the questions were great, or at least, passable. But yeah, I think that's everything. Sorry for not doing one of these in a while. It's been very busy past few months and another very busy few months coming up. So I figured I'd just squeeze one in as quickly as possible today. But you all rock. Thanks for making the community awesome. More competitions coming for more equipment, because it's like stressful how much I have to give away, but again, I'm trying to cover as much shipping as possible and it just gets really expensive. So yeah, thanks. My stash looks good on camera, doesn't it? All right, bye.